with Jonah today. So we'll go through Jonah chapter 3 today. There's some interesting things that are going on with Jonah chapter 3, but we will go back to Jonah chapter 2 just for a little bit. But everyone's health is doing okay and all that stuff. Everyone seems to be doing good. Good. Yeah, we had a tidy group last week. It was a tidy group. I had Ed and Midge and Gloria. So it was. I expect you guys to talk a lot today. That's about things. So what I want to do.
You've tripled your audience today.
I have tripled the audience. That's true. That's true. So what I want to do today is I want to read Jonah chapter 2, but I'm going to read it out of a weird translation. I'm going to read it out of The Voice, which is one of my favorite translations. The Voice is really interesting because it's written like a screenplay. And so it has like a different kind of feel to it. And I like it a lot. But for poetry, so The Voice, because it's written like a screenplay, all translations have a certain goal to their translation. They have a certain goal to, like, we want this to be kind of what our translation is about. And so some translations, their goal is word for word accuracy. A translation that's like that would be the New American Standard Bible. New American Standard Bible is extremely accurate word for word, but because they're so accurate word for word, many times the entire phrase or paragraph won't actually mean what the original author meant it to say, okay? So then you have translations which try to go for like phrasing, and phrasing, like, that's when you get like your New Living Translation. King James Version is very much this. It's a phrasing translation. You know, it's trying to, like, this is what they were trying to say. Because there's some weird translations in the King James Version, but because they're so beloved, our newer translations translate it the same bad way as the King James Version, but because if they change it, people will have a royal fit. And like that's not the Bible. That's why the second half of Mark is even in our English translations. Like, that's the second half of Mark chapter 16, you know, where they start handling snakes and stuff like that. If it wasn't in the King James Version, it wouldn't be in ours now. And so, like, that's because people are like, you're taking words out of Scripture. Like, no one thinks that stuff was in there. And so,
which one did you say was the most accurate?
Well, so NASB is very accurate word for word. NASB, New American Standard Bible, is really good word for word. But when you just read it, if you're just sitting there reading it, it's actually not very accurate phrase by phrase. And so you're trying to get it to say things. So The Voice, they try to nail the poetry. That's what The Voice's goal is. It's like, what were the feelings and the emotions that the author was trying to convey in the poetry? And so they sacrifice word accuracy for emotive accuracy. So in The Voice. So I'm going to read Jonah chapter 2 from The Voice for you guys right now. Let's see here. So let's see, that's Jonah chapter 1. That's not what we need. Here we go, Jonah chapter 2. To his God, the eternal, Jonah prayed. So the eternal always stands for God in The Voice. The reason why it's called The Voice is that, you know, at the beginning of John, it says the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The Word there. Well, the Word is just a translation. It's actually supposed to be translated voice. And the voice was with us, and the voice, is in the Word, and the voice became things. So that word, you know, it's, so they call it the eternal and they call it the voice. So the eternal means God. All right. To his God, the eternal, Jonah prayed from inside the great fish. Jonah, with desperate cries, I beckoned the eternal to hear. And he answered me, from the belly, the place of death, I cried to you. And you have responded to my voice. You threw me into the watery depths and cast me into the midst of the chaotic seas. The waters, they closed in around me. Your waves broke over me. The surf swelled as I sank into the depths. But then I said to you, I've been driven out from before your very eyes. Still, I know I will gaze again on your holy temple. The waters swallowed me. The deep abyss was covering over me. Seaweeds were wrapped around my head, trapping me as I sank down to where the mountains are rooted to the earth. I went down to the place where death's gate would lock me in forever. And yet, you lifted me up from the pit. O Eternal One, you are my God. Only as my life was fading away did I remember the eternal. To your sacred dwelling, your holy temple, my cries did rise to you. Those who worship worthless idols turn their backs on God and renounce their loyal love. But I will sing to you and sacrifice to you with a voice filled with thanksgiving. Whatever I promised, I'll certainly pay it, because deliverance is from the eternal alone. So as I'm reading that there, you can get that translation's trying to, it flows so much better. Like if you read a translation like the ESV, which is kind of the official translation of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, that translation is super clunky to read. I don't know what I don't know. I'm not a fan of the ESV. It's a fine translation. It's fine. You'll just come out Calvinist after reading it. That translate, it's just clunky. It just doesn't seem to flow, and the voice just flows, and poetry has to flow. So if you're reading a lot of poetry in the Bible, I really encourage you to find some of those phrase by phrase translations and read through them, because their goal is to kind of get more of the emotive sense of the reading, of the poetry. And so much like Isaiah is poetry. You know, like that's so much of the Bible is poetry. So I really encourage that. Read it out of the Voice, read it out of the Message is another one, New Living Translation. My favorite translation, just if you want to have one Bible and just read out of one Bible, I really like the NIV. It hits the middle. You know, it does a decent job at word for word, and it does a decent job of phrase by phrase. And it's readable. You can sit down and read it, and it won't slow you down. So that's my favorite. I also like the New Revised Standard Version, but that's just me. So we got Jonah in the midst of the beast. That's kind of what we talked about last week a little bit. Did anyone have any thoughts, because we have more people here today, did anyone have any thoughts on that section, on chapter 2, with Jonah in the middle of the belly of the beast? Anyone have any thoughts about that? Oops. No one? No, everyone's being quiet so far? All right, well, let's move on then. Let's move on. So Jonah chapter 3. So the very end of chapter 2 goes, and the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry ground, which is funny, right? Like that's, and so he vomits him out. And as I said in my sermon 2 weeks ago, I love that phrase, because I think that's like a sign of the cross, is that God often vomits us out into places that needs a word of the Lord. You know, like that's oftentimes Oftentimes you kind of end up in places that you had no idea where you'd end up, and you can be a messenger of good news in those places. So I love that idea. So then in chapter 3, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message that I give you. All right, so how many times is this that God has talked to Jonah?
Second.
Yeah, it's the second time, right? And it's like, so it's almost like God had to be like, all right, listen, now I need you to go to Nineveh. And that, I don't know what the word for great says, go to that great city, Nineveh, and proclaim the message that I give to you. I didn't look up that word in Hebrew, but I think I know what it is. It's probably kavod. And kavod literally means like heavy, big, important. Important is what it means. So it's not like talking just about Nineveh being like a huge city. We're going to get into that. It's going to talk about that a little bit. But go to that great city. Go to that big, important city is what's going on here, to Nineveh, and proclaim the message that I give you. All right, now, so what you need to yeah, go ahead.
Are you still in the Voice, or did you go back to something
No, I'm
else?
in the NIV now.
Okay, thanks.
I'm in the NIV now. So if you can follow along with whatever translation that you want, but that's just what I have in front of me. So
I don't know how to get that.
So verse 3 of chapter 3, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Already right here, what's the sense behind Jonah's obeying? What kind of sense? Are you getting any kind of sense from his obeying at this point? Is he doing it because he wants to?
No.
No.
Yeah. Everyone's saying that he's kind of reluctant there. Yeah. So he's just obeying. It's like when you catch your kid doing something and you tell them to apologize or something like that, and they have to, or they obey in cleaning their room, but they're not doing it willingly. I remember my mom tried to get me to journal when I was a kid, and I found that journal thing for I don't know, a few years back. An entire journal entry was about how my mom made me write this. Like that's what it was. So now Nineveh. Yeah,
I didn't think about it that much, but my footnote says that, of course, one of the problems Jonah had was that God was asking him to deliver a message of doom to one of the most powerful cities in the world.
Yeah. So he and that's what's going to be interesting when we get to chapter 4. About all of a sudden we learn a bunch about Jonah, because it kind of looks like he's being reluctant, maybe out of fear right now.
Yeah.
And that's that idea of that great city, Nineveh. It's big and important, and in Nineveh, I'm trying to. Yeah, Jack.
The footnote I have here at the end for that, where he says went to Nineveh, the great city, it says indicates not Nineveh's size, but God's concern for the city.
God's concern for the city.
That's what it says.
Yeah, that's an interesting that's an interesting wrinkle and facet of that, because I think that's true too, and I think that works with that. If the Hebrew word is kavod there, like it's important, is the word. So that's an interesting facet with God, with how God is looking at it. We're going to talk about this more in the sermon, so I don't want to kill all of the momentum in the sermon. But Assyria Well, one of the reasons why Assyria was powerful during this time, and Nineveh is kind of the main city inside of Assyria, is that you remember in history class, it always talked about how whoever has the biggest toys wins. You know, whoever has the best arrows and the best, like all that stuff, that they win. Well, that was Assyria right now. You know, I believe they came up with the siege towers. So that, you know, that the whole idea where they would wheel up something and was be able to scale walls, they came up with that. They were also just heinous in how they treated people when they conquered them. So they were known for sticking their people on poles and skinning them alive.
Oh,
So they were known for that. You know, a few things, and on Sunday I'll actually show some pictures of reliefs that were found in Mosul, I think, in Mosul, that were from this era and kind of showed like a history of how the Assyrians were treating people and all that stuff. You know, like back in the day propaganda type of thing. And so over there, and what's interesting is about 6 years ago now, when ISIS was really big in that area, they blew up a whole bunch of this stuff. Like the stuff that was sitting in museums there in Mosul and all that, it's now dirt and powder, which is super sad. There also used to be a grave of Jonah over there in Mosul. There was like Jonah's grave, and so that got blown up too. So it's but yeah, that stuff used to be over there in that region. So that's kind of the region like that we're talking about when we talk about Nineveh. You know, we're talking about Mosul. And so yeah, important. So Ed, with your note about God's importance for the city, and then like just like how big and important was everything was with it. You know, we got to look through that lens. Oh, Ed, your note was about how Jonah could be frightened. So that's why I kind of talked about like Nineveh's reputation in the region. You know, of not being very nice people to outsiders. So we'll continue on. Verse 3. So Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city, and it took 3 days to walk through it. It says to go through it, to walk through it. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Like, first off, you're seeing a lot of threes, right? Well, seeing a lot of threes, and there's also 40s. Whenever you see 3s and 40s and 12s in the Bible, it's and 10s, multiples of 10s. Those are important numbers, right? Those are important things that we see. So what do you think, when you read that Nineveh is a very large city and it takes 3 days to walk through it, what do you think that's talking about? What do you think? Do you think it's actually talking about what it takes 3 days to walk through the city? No. Yeah, so I did some investigating. So if I started walking from here right now, and I just walked straight through without stopping, do you know where I would end up 24 hours later? In Boca. In Boca. So Google says it takes 24 hours to walk to Boca. Now, if you walk 12 hours a day, that's 2 days to walk to Boca. That's Boca Raton.
Huh?
Boca Raton.
Oh, Raton.
Yeah, Boca Raton, yeah. That's a long way. Nineveh's not that big, all right?
According to my footnote,
Yeah.
it's about 30 to 60 miles across.
Yeah. That's 30 miles isn't 3 days.
10 hours.
That's
Yeah, exactly. It's 10 hours, like at the very most. But even, I mean, think about how big 30 miles is.
Yeah.
How many cities now are that big? You know, there's exaggeration going on. You hear it? Like there's exaggeration. There's no way that old city, I mean, you're talking city size like Singapore or New York to get 30 miles, you know?
No.
Like that's, there's no way. I mean, so, we think about it with like, oh yeah, South Florida. I mean, what's 30 miles? Is that West Palm Beach to, is it, that's probably Boca Raton, West Palm Beach to, is that about 30 miles?
Port St. Lucie to West Palm should be about 30 miles, I think.
Yeah, going down. Is it a little bit more than that? So, yeah. Yeah, it does. It's about 50 miles to the heart of West Palm Beach from here. And so it's over there. I don't have that stuff in front of me, but 30 miles is a big city. But what I'm trying to say is that there's exaggeration going on here, and there's exaggeration for a storytelling purpose. Because I don't think this city, you look at old cities and they're just not that big. They'd have no means of infrastructure back then. We have things like indoor plumbing, like that help have infrastructure that is able to support like New York City or LA or Chicago or Singapore or something like that, right? I mean, you think about fecal matter having to go somewhere. And this isn't Rome. Rome was kind of the first one to invent all that. So it's exaggerating, and it's exaggerating for a point. I think it's interesting that it takes someone to walk through the city of Nineveh, that it takes Jonah in the belly of the fish, the monster, the whale, whatever you want to call it, right? Like I think that's an interesting observation, is that when you start connecting, it takes as long as Jonah was in the fish to walk through this city. Now, if we think outside the box and we're kind of thinking about that, what do you think that could be? What could the author be telling us that? Because we just, he was in that fish for the 3 days, right? 3 days. And then all of a sudden, he's talking about that's how long it takes to walk through the city. What do you think? What kind of correlation do you think he's making there? What do you think? Have any idea? I'm guessing right now. We're doing Bible study, but it's a correlation, and I have a guess. I don't know. It doesn't say it in my notes at all.
How long Jesus descended into the hell?
So how long Jesus was in Sheol too? This pit of Sheol, because that's like so like in our creed when it talks about how Jesus descended into hell, the sense that it's giving off is that Jesus is in Sheol, which is how Jonah in the poetry is describing how he's in the belly of the whale. It's kind of like, I'm in the pit of the dead, I'm in the pit of the dead. And so, there's definitely correlation. Like do you see anything that may correlate with the size of Nineveh? I'm asking you guys to think outside the box. That's all I'm asking. Yeah, Cheryl.
Could it be part of a redeeming factor?
A redeeming factor? So by going through Nineveh, there may be some redemption found in it? Possibly. I don't know. Anyone else want to take a guess? I don't have a correct answer. like I'm just throwing it out there because it's too close and it's too much of an exaggeration for it not to be the same number. So like that's the fact that it's said the same way, he's trying to convey a message. And I think the time in Nineveh is almost a redemptive time, maybe like what Cheryl was talking about, a redemptive time for Jonah, like the time in the belly of the beast, the belly of the fish, like that it's this time, or like with Jesus in there, that it's a redemptive time for all of us. We follow along in the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, that it's a redemptive time for all of us. And I think Jonah is kind of dragging us into that too, where we can follow along with Jonah through this story of 3 days and maybe find like a redemptive arc in it. So yeah, that's very well the case. So, but that's an important part that's talked about there that we don't mention in the sermon. So I need to give you guys other things. All right, so let's go. So it takes 3 days to walk through. Jonah, remember Dove, son of faithfulness there, began by going a day's journey into the city. So a day. He didn't even go the whole distance, didn't go back to the other side, He goes right kind of to the middle, right? I went a day in, and he's like, I guess this is good enough. And he proclaims, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. That's it. That's it. No fancy poetry. Like, let's think about that. How many words in English is that he preached? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 words. 8 words. I say 8 words before I properly wake up. Like it's some of you are like, you should preach for 8 words. Like that's the way it is. But this is a nothing sermon. Now, think about when this is. Like you can go to the very next book, Micah, and it's a shorter book, but it's got 7 chapters in it. Like it's not like these guys, especially when they're getting written down in the Bible, are not verbose, Like they get written down in the Bible and they're just lengthy. I mean, think about Isaiah and Jeremiah. It's just prose upon prose upon prose, and they're just writing and writing and writing and writing. It's to the point where we really don't study Jeremiah and Isaiah much because they're so dang long. Like that's you just like, good grief, like settle down, guys. But yet Jonah, he goes 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Okay, what's interesting about his little sermon there? Besides the length. 40 days, right? 40 days. So what's that a callback to? What does that sound like? Jesus in the wilderness. Yeah, like that. That's definitely in there. What else? 40 years in the wilderness. Yeah, there's more.
What?
40 years in the wilderness. You got the flood.
Thank
The
you.
flood, the 40 days or 40 nights of water. Like 40 is a big number, and they're all kind of hitting at the same kind of idea. Like this is a time of judgment, time of renewal of all of these things. So 40 days. But what else is interesting about his little sermon there? What's missing? Cheryl says there's no alternative. There's something else that's missing. If I went to Lake Forest Point or Lake Forest over here, went into their little pagoda, and I said, 40 more days, no, hold on. 40 more days and Lake Forest will be overthrown.
How would you feel when you found out it wasn't overthrown? How would you feel as the one proclaiming it's going to be gone?
Oh yeah, it's a glorious.
Is that why you salt under the bush?
So Jonah.
He wanted it to?
So how are you? So Gloria is talking about how Jonah how he felt when this doesn't happen, and he's going to start sulking here in a little bit. But where's God mentioned in this? Like nowhere. Nowhere, right? It's for these prophets, God is talked about constantly. You know, God's angry with you. You're nasty people. If you watch the VeggieTales Jonah movie, you guys are doing nothing but slapping each other with fish. You know, like it's like nobody, you know, no one over here likes you. You're just all powerful and all that stuff. And he didn't mention that. There's no mention of God at all in his little sermon there, right? Like it's something that is missing. And yet, so, and also his sermon is, so again, we go back to that word obeyed, where Jonah obeyed the Lord, and he walks, you know, for a day into the city. He's like, I guess this is good enough. He's like, all right, guys, listen up. 40 days and you'll be overthrown. And it's almost like he went, all right, got it, God. I did my duty. I did what you told me to do. And he goes and sits down, right? You see that? And then what do we see here next? And this is what I love. The Ninevites, the Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth, you know, kind of like burlap, clothes of mourning, cheap jeans at the department store. You know, like that's so when Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is the proclamation that he issued in Nineveh. By decree of the king and his nobles, do not let people or animals, herds or flocks taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink, but let people and animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. All right, what do you think about everything that happened there? What kind of comes into your mind? What do you think about? Anything?
God was being merciful.
Well, God hasn't been merciful yet.
No.
That's the next verse. That's the next verse. So before that, how did the Ninevites act? Especially compared to his sermon.
They repented.
Yeah, they're repentant. And and this is a nuance of this. What are they repentant of? And why? Like, so they're repentant of all their sins and what they've done.
Evil ways and their violence.
Do what?
Their evil ways and their violence.
Their evil ways and their violence. Yeah, they're repentant of all of that. Now, here's the thing. Why? Why?
Afraid of his fierce anger and his punishment.
The fierce anger and his punishment. But I think verse 9 is interesting. They're like, who knows? God may yet relent and have compassion from his fierce anger. And what's interesting to me there, when they say who knows, they're expecting, they're not going into punishment going, all right, we're riding like Pecos Bill riding the punishment tornado all the way to the bitter end, right? Like they're not like just reveling in their like, well, if we're gonna die anyway, we're just gonna go out on our high horse, right? They fully intend to think that they are going to be destroyed in this story. But there's an off chance that they may not. But the reason why they're repentant is because of their sin and their destruction. Like that's their sin and falling away. I don't think their repentance is necessarily like, well, if we get good with the big guy upstairs, he'll save us. I don't think they're trying to get in good with God. I think they're actually being repentant for their terrible deeds. Does that make sense? Does that kind of make sense? And because I think many times we motivate people. I'll get on my hobby horse here for a second. It seems like the evangelistic mission of the church for the last 100 years has been, you best believe in Jesus or you're going to the bad place. Fear. Yeah, Gloria just said fear. Yeah, you best believe or you're going to the bad place. Like that seems like is what Jonah's trying to accomplish there, but the Ninevites aren't having any of it. It's almost like they see that it's like, oh, it's actually all this stuff is bad, you know, and they begin to put on sackcloth and ashes. And what's interesting too is the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath one. Who is supposed to take a Sabbath? And what is supposed to take a Sabbath? And do you guys remember?
No work.
No work. But who and what? Are you supposed to work your donkeys out in the field?
No.
No. Everyone. Are your servants allowed to work? No. Everything is supposed to take a Sabbath. Now, I've made fun of this guy. You need to understand, this guy was the nicest guy, one of Coley's best bosses. But Coley worked for an Orthodox Jew for a while. And she did, it was called Mad Science. And they basically did like experiments and they did birthday parties and then went into school during the week. But on Saturdays, this Orthodox Jewish guy, he was taking the Sabbath, but he was making all of his money with all of his employees all over St. Louis, doing birthday parties and stuff like that. And I was like, I see what you're doing there. He was a great boss. The dude was, like once a month, he did parties for his employees on Sunday afternoons after they went.
On your Sabbath.
It wasn't on their Sabbath, but he always made sure it was the afternoon. So if people wanted to go to church, they could. But he would usually rent one of those pagodas and he'd bring in food and all that. He was a great boss. But I always thought it was funny that he was making all this money on Saturday from his servants, you know, like all that stuff. But so like one of the things that the prophets talk about a lot is this play into keeping the Sabbath, play in like, oh, you guys, you do your sacrifices, but your heart isn't in it. You know, we see that. That's what Jesus picks up on when he turns over the tables. He's like, your hearts aren't into this. You're just into making money. That's all you're into. You know, and that's all you want. You just want to be like Jonah and just say, see, God, I did it. 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed. And you look at Nineveh's response, and who's putting on sackcloth? Like, do not let the people and the herds and the flocks taste anything. You know, don't, like everything is in mourning. Even the chickens are in mourning. And those chickens, they strut around the barnyard like they don't know anybody anything, you know? Like even the chickens are mourning. You know, the animals are even wearing sackcloth. Like it's a hilarious image. You know, so like if you go into the world of Jonah, you have this huge city that's, you know, it's as long and wide as South Florida is, you know, type of thing. Is, you know, if you add the width of South Florida to its length, and everyone in there, you probably couldn't buy any sackcloth. It's all gone, right? Like it's like toilet paper at the beginning of a pandemic. Like that's like everything is mourning, right? And it's almost like it's a sense of Israel was initially supposed to treat the Sabbath like that, supposed to follow the Lord like that. And we see that Nineveh is being a better expression of repentance and faithfulness than Israel itself. And I think that is what Jonah is trying to tell us right here. Because everywhere picks up on this. The prophets say over and over again, like, the powerful nations around you will be more faithful and will heap shame onto you when they go. That's what Jesus says is the sign of Jonah, is that Nineveh will rise up and judge you guys. Like that's, and so that's, I think that's really cool. And then and they all do it just because. And they end up saying, it's like, perhaps God will relent. Perhaps God will relent. And then verse 10, it says, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction that he threatened. And that's and we see the grace there. We see the grace that God has for them. So I don't know, what do you guys think of this chapter right here? We got like 15 minutes to go, and I'm basically out of stuff. Like that with this chapter. What are your kind of thoughts on this? Do you disagree with anything that I said a little bit ago? Here, Cheryl wants to say something.
Never be surprised by God's mercy.
Never be surprised by God's mercy? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and Nineveh, as it says, was a very, very, very bad place.
Yeah.
Very sinful. And yet, when they relented and asked for forgiveness, God forgave them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I don't want to steal the thunder of next week, but that's what next week's about, is what happens when God loves your enemy. Like that's the big one. Because it's, I think, and that it's, I don't want to take the thrust away from this one, I think, is justice. And are you happy with it? And are you happy with grace being shown people? Because that's kind of like, Jonah wants justice for all the atrocities that Nineveh has brought onto his people. And he's not getting it, So I don't want to get into all of that, but I really think it's interesting at how much Jonah chapter 3 mirrors the expectations of God's people. Mirrors the expectations of them. I remember we talked about a few weeks ago. I think it was a few weeks ago. What was it? The year of Jubilee, like when I think that was this class. It may have been another one, but it was the year of Jubilee that every 7 years, like all the debts had to be completely destroyed. Like that's over there. Now, there's no record that Israel ever did that, but it sure seems like Nineveh is doing that right now. Like that's what's interesting about it, is suddenly the people that are totally worthless, the people that are totally like, oh, those people over there are terrible, suddenly are being more righteous than you are. And suddenly you have to come to grips with that the righteousness of God can be found in other folks. Because I think sometimes that we think it's like, oh, well, I'm a Christian, I've been saved, I'm good. Like those heathens over there, they don't know what's going on. And suddenly we can find the Spirit of God living and indwelling in them. You know, like that's one of my favorite pieces of art that I've seen lately is this one where it's this big grid and there's all these little guys on the grid drawing lines on the grid, you know, and Jesus, and they're all looking over, and Jesus he's got a big eraser and he's erasing the lines, and he's erasing the lines, and they're all looking at him like very angry. And I think that's the story of Jonah, is that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Nineveh is outside the grace of God. Like we know that, and yet they're in. And so how do we respond when they are in? And so that's kind of what this book is about. I don't know.
Isn't that somewhat what people have difficulty with in this, especially in this day and age? Sometimes justice is tempered with grace.
Mm-hmm.
And what one person's conception of justice is not what the other person's is.
Yeah.
And it all gets muddled.
Now you're getting to where I thought we were going to be going today. Yeah, there you go.
I watch Fox News.
They so it's like, so one person's sense of justice. So we're kind of getting into the sermon now, but we'll get into it for a little bit. So the down and dirty, easy way is we usually want justice when we've been hurt, right, by someone. It's like, oh, you mowed the lawn at 10 o'clock at night and you need to suffer now, you know, like that's over there. But, you know, if we do something, we're like, oh, but I need grace. You know, I need grace in this circumstance. We get off of our justice high horse as soon as we've found something that we're wrong with, right? Like that's Cheryl.
Don't we think sometimes that it's justice when it's really revenge?
Oh, that's interesting. So Cheryl, I don't know if you could hear her or not, but Cheryl said, do we call it justice sometimes when it's actually revenge? That's
Absolutely.
that's kind of an interesting kind of look for it, because that's kind of like back in the day, like the eye for an eye thing in the Old Testament. That was a way of stopping revenge. It was a way of stopping people. That, you know, because normally if Gloria came up here and punched me in the face, normally I would just punch her even harder, right? It's like someone hurts me, I'm going to hurt you back even harder, right? And then that person retorts back. And so the original like law codes where they said eye for an eye were there to stop revenge, like eye for eye. Now Jesus throws that on its end and goes, hey, have a cross-shaped life, and absorb some of the pain. And so that's what Jesus kind of was saying in there. But yeah, I think justice is a hard thing, because normally we want justice when we have felt injustice, but we're very, very often we are not champions of justice when we're on the bad side. You know, and that's I think you see that all the time, and we stop being that, and I think we need to realize that discrepancy in us, you know, when we're just living, and seeing how Nineveh here actually went in for justice. You know, they didn't like, oh, please, you know, they were just like, perhaps God will relent. Maybe I'll see him. So they didn't see it as anything they deserved. So I don't know. That's a good saying there, Midge. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Now I have to leave.
Yeah. And I'm out. That's a George Costanza thing from Seinfeld. Like he would always say something funny in a meeting and he'd leave.
See you next week.
Yeah. All right. But anyone else want to say anything? But that's kind of Jonah chapter 3. That's Jonah chapter 3. It's a
Funny that chapter ends right there, and you read the next verse out of chapter 4.
yeah.
That be included in chapter 3.
But Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became
He was
angry.
really mad.
Yeah. So the very next verse is that Jonah felt like that was very wrong, and he became exceedingly angry.
I say one thing about Jonah, he was very consistent.
and I think that's where we see the similarities between God's people and this book of Jonah, and why I like calling this a parable, because it's once you look at this, you cannot see you cannot not see Israel in it. Like it's too, whether or not Jonah was a historical figure or not, whether it happened or not, I don't think that matters. Like it's an interesting story that this guy was in a belly of a fish and all that stuff, but I don't think that matters. It could have happened, sure, whatever. But the important part is that, man, this looks like Israel, and I think oftentimes we look like this as well. So we'll get into more of it next week. Yeah, there's nothing else going on. So may God continue to bless and keep you all, and that you would have a great week, and the scriptures would continue to be open to you. Amen.
And